Hello, welcome to the Horticulturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan, and we post a video every week, so why not subscribe and press the alert button so that you can keep up with our horticultural daring-do.
Do, and daring it is. And if you have a burning horticultural question for Mr. Ryan, put it in the comments below, say where you're from in the world, and he will answer it in our Monday Shorts.
I'll certainly do my best.
Talking of burning questions, Stephen, I'm feeling warm flames behind me.
Yes, it's all a little over the top, but that's me. Yes, today we're going to have a look around the garden.
We are. So it is mid-spring here in Australia, and your garden is just looking beautiful at the moment. And there's things, I mean, I say this often, but every time I come to Stephen's garden, I see something I've never seen before, which...
Yeah, I sneak it in the day before you arrive.
Still in a pot.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing, because your garden is so cleverly layered that there is always something that has its moment, and then when that moment passes, something else. So if you just miss that moment, you never see it. So anyway, it's a gorgeous time to be touring your garden.
Yes, so we'll have a look at some of the plants that are doing their thing as we wander around, and I guess we'd better, talk
address
about...
the elephant.
Yeah, address the elephant in the room. We did do a video on this plant some time ago, and it's my piece of frippery and nonsense.
Kitsch could be the word that springs to mind.
Artistic pursuit is also a word that could come to mind. This is Miscanthus giganteus, and ordinarily it would be a strawy colour, but not when you've got 4 cans of red spray paint, it isn't. So I call it Miscanthus Juliuxii. Some people think it might be Tordman's eye, any paint brand you can think of. And this is Rubra, it's the red one. But I could have it as Aurea or Niagara or Violacea. It could be any colour I want. So there you go. It's a bit of fun, takes a little bit of effort to do, but those stems will stand there for the next 12 months. And as the new shoots come up around them, you still have the value of them. So it's, I think, worth the effort.
And the contrast of the new green shoots that are just coming out now, it is very beautiful. It's one of our first ever videos, so the resolution might not be that strong, but we'll link it up there and you can see how Stephen creates
this. Yes.
Miscanthus Juliuxii.
Yeah, so there you go. So why don't we go for a walk and see what else is happening around the garden?
Come on.
Let's go.
Well, Stephen, this is the other driveway to your garden, and whoops, I'm just falling on the gravel. On that side, there is Sambucus and Euphorbia that we've covered before.
Yes, so there's videos specifically on those groups of plants, and they're looking lovely.
Just beginning to do their thing, but perhaps more interestingly, on this side is one of your sort of rock gardens.
Yep.
And as we're walking up, I am just noticing some beautiful things in bloom. So should we actually not go much further and stop right now and look at these?
Yes, I think that's a good idea, and let's have a look at some. Well, our timing's pretty good, Matthew, because my Cyclamen persicum are in full bloom at the moment. They're heavenly scented, and they're self-seeding themselves gently through the rock garden here. And of course, this dainty and elegant little plant is actually what the large pot cyclamen that you might buy for Mother's Day or whatever was bred up from. So they started with these little tiny dainty things and bred them up into those great big Goliaths of a plant, which I think is sad in a way because they've lost all of their natural charm. So I'm very happy to have the wild form. It's not overly cold hardy, so it's probably still something you'd grow in a pot in the colder climates. But certainly here, as long as I keep it away from the frost, it grows beautifully and it flowers for months. And of course, with the name persicum, it gives it away a little bit because it comes from Persia, although we don't call Persia anymore, but you know what I mean. So it's one of the Middle Eastern species. And don't forget too that we did an epic on cyclamen a while back. So if you go into the back catalogue, you'll be able to find it, and we follow them throughout the whole year.
Glorious to see your cyclamen, and there are more South African bulbs just up here in the border.
This is something that I love in the garden, and it's one of those plants that has a particularly good opening hours because it doesn't open till after 10 in the morning and it closes by 4.
And it's reminding me of the beautiful video we made at Bickley Vale a few weeks ago with all of those amazing South African bulbs in bloom.
Yes. And this is another one to add to that collection. Why not indeed?
Let's look. Oh, Stephen, more South African bulbs. This is stunning. What is it?
All right. Well, it was until comparatively recently called Spiloxine capensis, and it's actually the floral emblem of the Indigenous Bulb Growers Association of South Africa.
You're welcome.
They do have some wonderful bulbs. It's now considered to be in a different genus, and it's called Pauridia capensis. Comes in a range of colours. They almost always have that dark, almost black centre, but you can get orange ones with a black centre, you can get sort of violety purpley pink ones with a black centre.
I think I bought some orange ones from you, Pauridia.
Yes, you did, the straight orange Pauridia.
But it's a smaller star.
Yes, yeah, that was a different species again, so there are a number of them. This has got to be about my favourite though, because the contrast of the pure white petals against the dark centre, and when the flowers close, they're green striped brown on the outside.
Oh, yeah.
So when they close up, they almost disappear. You wouldn't know they were there.
No.
And then suddenly, when there's enough light and it's late enough in the morning, they go whee, and out they come, and they really are quite a magnificent thing. And the flowers are quite large, and it's not truly a bulb, but it has a sort of a, I guess it's a little rhizome, a little short rhizome underneath it.
Okay.
And in fact, they can be really hard to find when it's dormant. So it's one of those plants that I've learnt over the years, when you can't find the bulbs, wait till they've just started to come up, then you can find the bulbs. So that's when I lift and divide some of these things as they're just coming up.
So that would be my question. Some South African things in Australia just go nuts and take over the world,
Yes,
like
freesias
Watsonias.
yes.
Well, some Watsonias, because we'll get to that.
Yeah.
What about this baby?
Well, I've never seen it go feral anywhere. I mean, it's multiplying itself in the garden here quite well. There's quite a nice drift of it that's sort of developing.
Yeah.
But it's sort of worked its way down the rock garden a wee bit. But that's probably from me weeding and moving tubers when I haven't noticed.
It's pretty scant. I mean, how long's it been here?
Oh, easily 10 or 15 years.
So it's certainly not taken over.
No. So my gut feeling is it's never likely to be an issue environmentally in this country, but it's certainly got great ornamentality if you're looking for something interesting for a rock garden.
And does it produce seed pods? Have you seen
I haven't noticed it set seed. There's no real reason why it shouldn't, but when I do grow it, I tend to just lift the tubers because there's nearly always enough under there to do something with.
Right. And then what we might just do is I'll show the viewers look behind you, Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
What is that beautiful tulip?
All right, so it's behind me is the last of the tulips to flower, a species tulip called Tulipa sprengeri, and it's a charming small flowered red one, and it's just sort of the farewell of spring for that genus. And I think it's a charming tulip. Don't see it for sale terribly often in this country, certainly, but it is obviously here because I've got it. I haven't seen it on anybody's lists for ages and ages. And it gently multiplies and it's making a nice drift now. So I've got quite a nice little drift of it sort of wafting through this garden bed. And as most of the spring bulbs are finishing, it's still doing its thing.
And I guess just to reiterate, this is an elevated bed, so it's free draining and you never water it. So it gets quite... Actually, does it get much sun here? Yes.
It gets a fair bit, although I have to say the bamboo hedge at the back is having some impact. So it's quite shady at the back of the borders. So I tend to grow some more woodlandy plants right at the back. And I try and keep the real sun lovers right on this front edge because then they can pick up a fair bit of sun.
There you go. On we go. All right, well, let's cut through the Chekhovian cherry orchard.
Yes.
Although it's not a cherry orchard.
No, exactly. It's an orchard nonetheless.
I am noticing Sparaxis.
Yes, Sparaxis and freesias are being naturalised in the lawn. They haven't done very much yet, but this year's the first year we've had a fair few blooms. I'm assuming over the next couple of years they'll really start to build, and that's when we need to be really careful about how and when we cut the grass.
Yes.
Because you can't cut too early.
True. And once again, the video we made in Bickley Vale, the Sparaxis that had naturalised there.
Yeah.
Just stunning. Now, there's one of my favourite plants, which I always associate with you because I bought it from you before I knew you, Stephen.
Yeah,
right?
well, there you go.
Which is this fantastic Chilean plant over here. Let's have a look.
Let's go and have a look at that. I think it's fabulous as well. So we both have similar taste.
Well, Stephen, I think this is something I just associate with you.
Yes, well, it is one of those plants I've had a passion for actually since childhood.
Really?
Yes. It used to be one of those plants you'd see growing in a pot on people's verandas. Generally older gardeners had it. It never seemed to show up in the nurseries, but people swapped it amongst themselves. And when I decided I wanted it, of course, all those people had disappeared.
They died.
Yeah, as things happen. And it took me ages to find my first plants of it. And I can proudly say I've been one of those that has helped perhaps bring it back into cultivation again. And I love it.
So the name?
The name is Tropaeolum tricolor.
And why is it called tricolor?
Because it has three colours in the flower.
They are the most amazing thing. So once again, this is a Chilean plant.
Yeah.
And
it's a nasturtium, basically.
yes, but you have a lot of Chilean plants. So the Chilean, I guess the climate can certainly sort of marry with parts of Victoria.
Oh yes, because it's not cold unless you go right up into the Andes. So they get a defined winter, they get, in lots of cases, particularly sort of central Chile and further north, they get a proper summer, so it can be quite Mediterranean in its climate zone. And so a lot of these plants, which actually need a summer dormancy, grow very well here because we don't get too much summer rain as a rule.
So here's the thing, the life cycle of this plant I find fascinating. So just talk us through that.
All right.
So it's mid-spring now and it's doing its thing.
Yes, and it starts in early winter, or in fact, actually mid-autumn really. It will start to erupt out of the ground once it gets some autumn rains. It'll run up through its support, and in this case it's growing up through a Chilean shrub, Ugni molinae from Chile.
Highly appropriate.
Yeah.
Now this is just a quick sidebar then. This is actually quite low. It's probably a metre,
Yeah.
you know, a couple of feet. And I had always assumed it wanted to run further up.
As it will do if it's got the support to grow on. But having seen this growing in the wild, it tends to grow in areas where there's lots of low shrubs. And that seems to be quite happy in that sort of environment. So it'll just run up and over and sort of flop around through and over the plant and create all this beautiful red colour at and below eye level.
And then it dies down late spring, early
Yeah,
summer.
once you get your first really hot days, the plant will start to go really yellow. It'll start to collapse. You certainly, at that point in time, whether you've been watering it or not, you have to start withholding water, because during the summer months it dies down to a woody tuber, and they can be all sorts of weird and wonderful shapes and sizes, sometimes quite small, sometimes quite big like a potato, and that tuber needs to stay dry through the summer months. So that's it.
And so following your advice, I stopped watering mine and I let it dry out completely. And then in February, so in late summer, dig them all out and then repot them.
Yeah, give them some fresh potting mix and away they'll go.
And they multiply. So hence that reference earlier on that people give it away to friends. But last year you had a crisis and I was able to jump in, horticulturalists.
Yes, you were. And I was quite chuffed about it, I have to say. I had a disaster in the nursery where a lot of my stock, the tubers, were actually eaten by what I assume were some sort of bush rat or something. I never caught the culprit, so I don't know what was doing it exactly.
Probably endangered, so good
Yeah,
thing
probably
you didn't.
was. But so were my Tropaeolums, and I have to say they really went in and they cleaned out a lot. So I had very few left in the nursery. Fortunately, down here I still had some. But yes, Matthew saved the day by bringing me some stock back.
Which is lovely, and this is the great thing about gardening, particularly things that do propagate themselves quite easily, is that you can share the love.
Exactly.
I adore this plant. Now, we're in Mount Macedon, so my plant in Melbourne has turned yellow and it's on the downward
Yeah, it's on
spiral.
the downside. This will, I think we're starting to get a few warmer days, so I don't think it'll be terribly long before this starts to yellow as well. And what I'm hoping to do this summer is actually also find a few more tubers than I need here and take some more stock back to the nursery.
And then just the last point about this, your tubers, it often does very well, the tubers in the rootstock of the shrub that it's going to scramble, because it does stay quite dry.
Yes, in fact, having a host plant like this will keep the tubers dry during the summer unless we have one of those inordinately wet ones. And that's why I always like to have some stock back in pots so that you can actually manage them so they stay nice and dry.
All right, well, we're going to now just spin the camera cunningly this way to this glorious Solomon seal.
Yes, now, as common as it is, it's got to be one of the most useful semi-woodland plants that I have in the garden.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to mind getting quite dry, particularly once the colonies are well settled in the garden. It pops up in the spring, you get these beautifully elegant arching stems.
So elegant, and a sort of a slightly grey blue-green.
Yeah, and then you get the little white and green tipped bells that hang under the branches. And I have to say, 3 stems shoved in a bottle and you're a floral artiste. They're so elegantly beautiful, but remember, don't get carried away picking them, because when you do pick Solomon seal, you're picking the foliage as well as the flowers. So you don't want to take too many stems out of the colony, otherwise you'll have an impact on the colony itself, as you would have if you did to your asparagus and just kept picking and picking and
Aha. Now, when is this going to die down?
Well, that dies down in the late summer, and the plant will go quite a pleasant yellow before it dies down. And just an aside, I mentioned asparagus. You can actually eat these. When they're little shoots coming up above the ground, you can pick them and eat them like asparagus. I haven't tried it. I've read about it, and I'm assuming that I haven't read false information. So you could perhaps cook them, but I think I'll stick with normal asparagus, actually. I think that's all I need.
And we made a video with Jane Tonkin, who is a bulb and rare perennial plant specialist, and she has all manner of varieties.
Beautiful, beautiful types. In fact, you could spend your whole life collecting them. I think there's something like 73 species of Polygonatum in the world. They're all North American and Asian, and some of them are quite challenging, so that's always fun for these, you know, for the mad person.
Mad horticulture.
Yeah, and some are really easy. And this one's a hybrid between two of the European species, and it's known as Polygonatum hybridum. So there you go.
Ta-da. Well, let's carry on. There's something I want to look at down here.
Oh, yes, and I know exactly where you're heading.
Let's go.
All right.
Fuchsias, Stephen, my gateway plant when I was a kid. Yeah. Neighbours of my step-grandparents grew fuchsias, well, commercially, but, you know, like...
Yeah, backyarders, basically.
Yeah, who would sell them to the nursery trade. And they'd let me take cuttings and whatever. So it was my first horticultural experience. Yeah. This one, though, I love that tired pink colour.
It is, it's rather sweet. And it's funny you should talk about being gateway plants. I've always liked them as a plant, but I've never been overly mad keen about fuchsias personally. And I must have said so at some talk I did somewhere.
Also endlessly in our videos.
Well, possibly in our videos.
It's like
but this was quite a long time ago. Before we started, I got this fuchsia.
Okay.
And there was a funny gentleman whose name I don't now remember, who was part of the Fuchsia Society, who was determined I was going to have my head changed towards fuchsias.
Yeah.
And he arrived at my nursery one day.
Conversion therapy.
Yeah, it was conversion therapy. He gave me about 4 fuchsias, 2 of which I still have in the garden. Don't quite know what happened to the others, but this is one of them, and it is actually rather sweet. And I remember its name was White Knight Pearl. And it's obviously a Fuchsia magellanica type. It has very soft pink flowers on it. It flowers almost forever, makes quite a sizable bush. And yes, I can live with this one in the garden quite happily. It is really quite sweet. And yes, so it does pay not to, in fact, be completely one-eyed about any group of plants. And in fact, recently I started growing Fuchsia splendens and Fuchsia X corticata up at the nursery. So I'm even growing some of the fuchsias now for sale. So there you go.
It is.
And maybe I should be doing this one.
Yeah, it's a beauty. And we've made a fuchsia video with Peter. Fantastic and informative. And so if you want to know how to propagate them, which is very easy, go and watch that video.
Yes, and enjoy your fuchsias nonetheless. And these magellanica types are comparatively cold hardy, can be grown in lots of parts of the world where some of the big fancy fuchsias would need to be protected.
And the classic magellanica species type has gone feral in Ireland.
Oh,
example,
yes, and it has gone feral in other areas as well, but Ireland particularly.
And on Mount Macedon.
Yeah, it shows up occasionally. It's just taking a little bit of a liberty and showing up where it perhaps shouldn't be. But they're lovely plants, and of course the honey-eating birds adore Fuchsia magellanica in its normal red form because it's tubular and it's red, and the honey-eating birds love those sort of flowers.
And again, another sort of coolish climate South American plant.
Oh yes, and really pretty, and yes, look, I do quite like it.
All right, let's go. All right, Stephen, let's leave the beautiful fuchsia, and I'm glad you found a place in your cold heart for fuchsias.
Oh dear.
Now, we're walking up sort of the main walkway to the perennial border. Now, we've covered this in many videos, but once again, this particular time of year, I've never seen some of the things that are going on here. So it just goes to show there's always something going on.
Oh yes, most definitely. So we need to go and engage with my perennial border and see what's doing its thing.
Let's. So the perennial border, it is mid-spring.
Yeah.
And there are 2 things that strike me. Firstly, you can just see sort of on the horizon there, that golden leafed shrub. I honestly don't think I've ever seen that before.
All right,
But
so
the
do
colour...
we reveal yet, or do we wait till we get up close to it?
Tell the people, but the colour, look, the colour's so striking.
Yeah, well, it's actually a golden fuchsia.
Ha-ha! More fuchsias in your cold, cold heart.
Yeah, well, that one is the golden leaf form of Fuchsia magellanica. So when we get up there, we'll see the little tiny red flowers in amongst it. But the gold foliage is a great contrast to the silver of the cardoons in front.
Yes.
So those great big thistly looking things. And actually I quite like the silvery leaves of the Arctotis down at ground level with their burgundy flowers sort of rising up, and then of course through it all is some variegated Arundo donax, the oboe reed, which is erupting out of everything at the moment, and it will take precedence later.
So that's the thing. So whenever I've been here in the past, that reed is a big clump and it dominates visually, and so I've just never noticed that fuchsia ever.
Yeah, well, there you
which
go.
Is hilarious.
You should come
I
time of the year.
I should come more often.
Yes.
Now the other thing that I actually just thought was an aloe isn't.
No, it isn't. It's a Watsonia, and most people are familiar with the big growing pink and orange and white Watsonias that are becoming quite weedy in some
I was going to
areas.
say, which come with a health warning in Australia. I mean, I know in the southwest of WA, where my mum used to live, Watsonias there are such an invasive problem.
Particularly Watsonia bulbifera, because it not only spreads by seed, but it produces little bulbs, or they're actually corms, but anyhow. I don't know how you'd Latinise that, so bulbifera will do. And of course, every time it finishes flowering, all those little cormlets all fall off and hit the ground, and within a couple of years you've got more flowering sized plants. So it's a nightmare.
And it forms such a dense clump that it smothers everything in its path.
Now,
But
on the other hand, yes, this Watsonia aletroides, is a comparatively small growing South African species, and it has these quite long tubular flowers like an aloe.
which is what I thought,
Yeah, with a sort of a whitish end to the flowers, which I assume helps pollinators find their way in. And it seems to be quite stay-at-home, quite benign. I've had it in the garden here for years and it's just made a nice tight little clump. I haven't found any seeding anywhere. It certainly doesn't produce bulbils. And so I feel fairly confident in most areas you're not going to have a problem with aletroides. But it's a really pretty small growing Watsonia that sits nicely in the front of a border. And I do like plants that are a bit see-through, because if there's something happening behind them, you can still see through them to the plants behind. And the Watsonia does that well.
yeah. So the other thing that's kind of at its peak now is Cerinthe. And again, because other things haven't come into their own, and that's an early bloomer.
Yes.
It looks stunning.
Yep, and it's one of those self-seeding annuals that finds its own way through the border, tends to come up towards the front of the border, mainly because there's more light there and probably less mulch, so the seed manages to get a sort of a head start. And once you've got it in the garden, at least in my garden, it's always there. So I always have some Cerinthe major come up every year. I love the silvery leaves with a slightly spotty look to them. I love the little sort of bruised burgundy purple flowers on it.
We've had tired pink, bruised purple.
Yes, yes. And yes, it's just a great little sort of filler. So it pops up in gaps and things and just completely fills the front of the border. So I wouldn't want to be without it.
No. And then if you just stand there, what we can see is your sort of coral tree. Is it a coral tree? The common name? Flame tree?
Coral tree, yes.
And what's the botanic name?
It is Erythrina crista-galli.
And yours is pollarded every year?
Every year. And so I cut it back to almost the same point every year. So it's slowly building up a big fat sort of reservoir of little buds that it can shoot from again. In the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, they have some that are grown up on huge big trunks.
I was going to say, the one we saw the other week, it's just like something from a Harry Potter film.
Oh yes, I keep mine at that height because one, I don't want it to become a tree in the border, and also if it was up high, all the flowers would be way up there somewhere. When it does flower, I want the flowers to be part of the border.
And just to clarify then, you pollard it, but those new growths will be mature enough to flower in the one season.
Oh yes, I always get some nice flowers on them, generally in late summer, early autumn. Sometimes I get a secondary crop just before the frost hits. So yes, I get enough flowers on the plant to warrant the space that it takes up, because I'm always sort of analysing these things. And yes, so once a year I get in there with the welding gloves, because it has spikes on it, and prune back to more or less the same point every year.
And when do you do that? What point in the year?
Midwinter, once the frost has had its wicked way and knocked all the leaves off and turned the plant into a basically a skeletal mess. I get in there with the secateurs and just cut it all back, and because it's got a nice big hard old stump under it now, the frost will only take the new growth back. So it will keep coming from the one spot every year, and I guess it's 20 minutes once a year. I cut it back, throw all of the scraps through the shredder, and it turns into mulch. It's fabulous. So yeah, I like my Erythrina.
There you go. All right, well, let's carry on up the path through the veggie garden up to the back.
All right.
Okay, Stephen, leaving the perennial border, what's that fabulous Babiana?
Oh, Babiana ringens, which has its own bird perch.
Yes.
It's a fabulous plant and flowering its little head off at the moment.
And we've made a Babiana video, which that features in, but it's looking gorgeous. So through the veggie garden, flashbacks to gardening Australia. We won't linger.
Yeah, well, I struggle with that still, but anyhow.
You're triggered.
Yeah, I get triggered. All right, so we're heading through the veggie garden and we're going to what I grandiosely call my citrus walk.
But before we get there, a little sidestep. Oh.
Yes. Can you smell it?
Well, I can, but I don't think the viewers can.
No.
Okay, let me put the camera down and we'll focus on this. Lilac, Stephen.
Yes.
Oh.
Isn't it lovely?
The fragrance is stunning. Now, we made a video about this whole group because these are not your common or garden lilacs.
No, these aren't the hybrid lilacs that people are familiar with that sucker all over the garden. And I always call 1 week wonders because they're in flower for a week to a week and a half, and then when they're finished, there's nothing to go on with. But these little species lilacs not only flower beautifully and have a nice perfume, possibly not quite as exotic as the hybrid ones, but they're beautifully scented. They have pert and pretty little leaves.
Pert and pretty?
Yes, and then when the foliage starts to get ready to shed in the autumn, it actually does not a bad job of autumnal colour, which lilacs are not renowned for. But this one will colour quite nicely, and that is a fully grown specimen. I don't know that I've seen Syringa meyeri pallidum, the dwarf Korean lilac, any bigger than this one. So it's fully grown, sits nicely on the end of this bed. I'm probably going to have to start pruning it back a wee bit because it's starting to encroach a bit. But it's been here for 10 years or more, and I've never had to cut it. I've never had to do anything to it. And every spring it just comes out in a massive bloom.
And it's a beautiful fragrance because the hybrid ones, it's a very heady, very dominant, whereas this is a lovely garden fragrance.
Yes,
it's
it's
not like
light.
you've been squirted with something.
Yeah, yes, it's very light and airy and it's lovely.
And now, do we have another one over there?
We do, in fact. We have another related species, Syringa patula Miss Kim, which does all the same things this does, but flowers fractionally later, has a bigger leaf, and still also autumn colours. So
Ta-da!
Yeah.
All right, now we can carry on down the citrus walk. And there is citrus, so it's not
it's not
an
me,
oxymoron.
Yeah, no, it's not me being affectatious. It is actually a walk that has citrus along it. So
Okay, let's go and walk.
Might not be Versailles.
So, passing stage left of
Yes.
the fabulous lilacs. Oh my goodness, the peonies, Stephen!
Yes. Now, these are a group of plants that I make no effort to try and colour coordinate with because they're so full of their own self-importance.
Look at this!
That why would you think they're going to harmonise with anything?
Okay, well, let's stop and have a look at your peonies. Oh, look, and there's citrus in your citrus walk.
Well, exactly. I've told you so.
Now, tree peonies.
Oh, yes.
Is there anything finer? Don't answer that question.
Yes. They are one of those plants that when they come into flower, they are so in your face that they can't be really combined with other plants. Nearly anything else is going to be pushed into the shadows when a tree peony comes into flower. So I just like them to have their way, basically. And this is, well, being a bloke, I like strong colours. And
Let's not be so gender specific.
yeah, well, I hate to tell you, but you'll find that quite truly, when people come into the nursery, the men will go for the bright, splashy colours, so reds, oranges, etc., and the ladies will go for the pastels, almost invariably. So,
Okay, don't make any comments on that statement, viewers.
Yeah, no, you don't need to, but this is from years and years of experience. And this one is one called Black Panther, which is probably my all-time favourite in the reds.
I can say, Black Panther, it's dark red, but anyway.
Yeah, well, what do you say? I mean, some people, it's a good name in a sense. It's an easy name to remember, and it does allude to the fact that it's a nice dark colour, and it's a strong, robust peony. You can tell by this plant it's up to nearly shoulder height already, and it will still keep growing. It will get bigger yet again. So
and
it's quite a large
flowers,
one.
I mean, honestly, what can you say? The petals are like lacquer, like Chinese lacquer, but all those stamens are gold.
It is. It's just truly, truly beautiful.
Now, how much sun does this border get?
It gets the sun the vast majority of the day. I mean, late afternoon it disappears behind the eucalypts in the property behind me, but it gets all the sun from sort of mid-morning right through until mid to late afternoon. So the peonies get adequate sun to flower well. They can cope with even more. They'll still flower with even a little less. So they are fairly adaptable when it comes to light requirements.
Yeah. Now, I can see from this that there's a huge amount of new growth.
Yeah.
So do you ever prune it?
Only
or do you
take the flower heads off.
Right.
So I go back 1, 2, 3 to 4 leaves below the flowers, and then I will find a leaf that has a growing bud against it, and I will prune the flower head off to there. Unless I'm growing the tree peony to collect seed from, which I only do generally with some of the species ones. I don't normally worry about collecting seed off the hybrids. So I will cut those all back to that point above the first non-blind leaf, and that gets rid of what will end up being a dead piece on the top of all of the peonies.
And of course, we have made a tree peony standalone video. There are way too many videos to link through this, but I'll put them all below in the copy section, so you'll be able to see all those videos.
Yeah.
My other question, or it's a statement, Stephen,
right.
is when I was in China, it kind of refers to your first point about how can you grow them and you can't kind of contrast them. But in the Chinese traditional gardens I saw, they are very much just in their own bed with nothing else, and it's just about the tree peony. And then when they're done, that's it.
Oh yes, and I sort of get that, because really, what can compete against something like this? So yeah, it is. It's a sort of a standalone plant, and if you're going to plant them, actually have several. You can have slightly variant flowering time, so it'll extend the period of your peonies in flower, and just revel in them. I mean, I don't worry too much about colour coordinating or any of those things with my peonies. I just revel in the fact that they're big and gorgeous.
And they are. And there's a few more big gorgeous ones. So
let's have a look at some of those.
All right.
Wow. Matthew. This is almost a holy grail when it comes to peonies. This is sold around the world as Peony Rockii. It's probably a Peony fruticosa form, but it was discovered by Mr. Rock, funnily enough, and it is exquisite. You've got these huge white petals. It's more or less single, and then you get these dark burgundy flares right at the base of each petal, and it is truly scrumptious, and it took me years to get a plant of this. This one's settled in nicely now. I've got one flower out and another bud to come. I'm hoping in the next couple of years it's going to compete with my Black Panther in due course. So Peony Rockii, and I've also got it in the garden in its double form, but it's not out in flower yet, and it looks like somebody threw paper tissues around the place, these huge big white fluffy things. So well worth looking out for.
And then Stephen, if you just move behind you, I think, what have we got there?
Ah, yes. Well, this is another one of the hybrid tree peonies, and this one is one called Hesperus.
As in the wreck of?
As in the wreck of, yes, it could be. I don't quite know why it's called Hesperus, but it comes out with this beautiful soft apricot semi-double flowers on it. Depending on the aspect or light, sometimes it's more pink looking than this, so people often find Hesperus various in colour depending on its aspect, but it's making quite a nice bush, and it's got probably 6 or 7 big flower buds on it, and yes, sumptuous and yummy.
Versailles might not be, Stephen, but your citrus walk is very charming, and I wonder if our viewers are interested in a Citrus in a Cold Climate, the lost novel of Nancy Mitford film.
Well, they might just be, so let us know if you'd like us to talk about my citrus and the climate I'm growing them in, and how successful I've been or otherwise.
Or not.
Or not, yes. Why not indeed?
There's a citrus. Okay, now we're heading up towards the largest pond in the garden.
And I've got something I'm very pleased with up there that I think we need to engage with.
Have you got something to us? Now we're passing under the Sontius, and this is a leaf that people often ask us about when they see it in the background.
Yes, that's Sontius canariensis.
And we've made a video about Sontius.
Yes, we have indeed.
And we're passing under
some Brugmansia. So look at that.
Oh, stunning Brugmansia sanguinea.
Yes, in its yellow form.
Yes,
Yes.
which we've made many a video about as well.
Yes.
You've cut this back, haven't you?
No, the frost cut it back.
Oh,
As
the
it
frost
does.
is a clever gardener.
Yes, it
Oh, blue, Stephen. Goodness, what a fabulous colour. Look at that.
yes, one of the Ceanothus.
Well, let's stop and have a chat because also at its feet is something else that's blue.
All right, yes, well, blue in a garden is always precious, so
Okay.
why not indeed?
Yes.
Here we have it. This is one of those groups of plants that has never really taken off in Australia the way it should do. I mean, it should be almost a stock in trade in every nursery, but you don't see the Ceanothuses being grown in any sort of quantity here, which
Really?
always surprises me. So this is one that I imported years ago because it's variegated.
Oh, I know, we're skimming. Although we've made a variegation video. Now, you might know I'm not a fan. However,
Yes.
the variegation on this leaf is quite handsome and balanced, but the blue of the foliage with the variegation, well chosen, Mr.
Yeah, it
Ryan.
does work. And it's a cultivar that goes under the slightly bizarre name of Pershaw Zanzibar. And it's not completely stable. I've got some
Nor are
sections...
the best of us.
Yeah, well, I've got some sections that have gone almost gold. And I have been cutting out some green sections out of it as well. So it's not a particularly stable shrub, but at least it's at a height that I can manage any of the inappropriate growth that it sends out. And certainly in the late spring, it's massive, fluffy blue flowers. I don't think there's any other group of plants I can think of that does this sort of blue as well as the Ceanothuses do.
So its common name is Californian lilac, so I'm presuming it's a California native.
Well, North American, they do come from more than just California. They extend to quite a large area of the United States. And there are masses of species, some of which are evergreen, some of which are deciduous,
Oh.
lots of which are blue, but there's also white and pink. So there's a range of different colours in the Ceanothus as well. But
So-
I'd say the blue's the best.
So obviously then, if some are deciduous, some are not, they come from a variety of climatic
Oh yeah,
conditions.
yeah. Some come from quite cold parts. Others in colder areas of the world would probably be used as wall shrubs. So they'd put them on in the northern hemisphere, a southern wall, so they'd stay nice and warm and protect them from the real cold. And that would apply mainly to evergreen species. The deciduous one should be able to be grown out in an open garden quite well.
I have, it's interesting you say it's not grown very much because my mum had one and I've actually just planted one in a friend's garden and it was at a nursery and it was pot bound and they gave it to us for nothing and it's just erupted. The minute it got its feet in the ground, poof.
Yes, they're pretty tough plants and they're mainly Mediterranean style climates that they come from.
Yeah.
So they're very adapted to hot, dry Australian summers and cool to crisp winters, but not
freezing.
frigid sort of winters.
Yeah. Now, it's a sort of, what does it want to do? Is it a lolliper through things or is it just an arching shrub? Where should you plant it? Because it's not necessarily a plant that has its own beautiful structure, is it? Or
Some of them have quite nice structure, but no, they tend to be sort of large, sort of billowy shrubs.
Yeah.
And they can certainly be mixed into a border with other things so that when they're not in bloom, they sort of disappear a bit. I mentioned wall shrubs, so they can in fact be grown against walls. They can be trimmed and pruned to keep them sort of tidy. There's one that is commonly grown here in Australia that they sell under the name of Blue Pacific, which isn't in fact Blue Pacific. They made that name up because the original name, of which I can't remember, was so unmemorable that they decided to rename it.
because you can't remember it.
Yeah, and so they did, and that worked quite well. But it's a particularly electric blue, and I find it hard to use because it's just too strong a shade of blue. It almost doesn't look natural. This, on the other hand, has got that slightly smokiness to it, which I find really appealing.
It's very, very beautiful. And common name, Californian lilac. We just passed your lilac. The fragrance is heavenly. This one,
Not so much.
there's a fragrance, but it's not
No,
a fragrance.
and of course they're not related to the
No.
lilacs. They're in a completely different plant group, and therein lies the sort of risk of using common names because they often don't actually really apply to the plant properly.
At a glance, the flower form is a smaller version of the hybrid lilac.
Yeah,
looking.
and that's where the common name comes from.
But now, casting our eyes downwards, at our feet is another strong blue.
Yes, and you know, how clever was it of me to place my two blue things like this together? And it's one of the ajugas, and I find ajugas really useful as ground cover plants. This is actually one called Jungle Beauty, which is struggling to find its place here because there's so much other stuff coming and going. But it does make a nice little pool of blue at the feet of my Ceanothus, albeit a slightly different shade.
It's a lovely contrast. All right, let's carry on.
All right.
Stephen, once again, we have spent a lot of time by your large pond.
Yes.
I have never seen that clematis, and is that art or design that it's just draping so spectacularly beautifully?
I did that. Of course I did that. Well, it grew out there on its own. I mean, I wasn't out there tying it above the pond on that branch. But yes, it's just the white form of Clematis montana. I'm hoping at some stage or another it'll find its way up to the next level and perhaps be festooning from even higher up in the eucalypt. But I love the way climbers, when they're grown as they should be, and that is in nature, growing on another plant, can really show their true nature and form. Growing something on a shed or on a fence is to hide the shed or the fence. It's not to show the climber at its most beautiful. So that is the way to show it, and I think that Clematis montana is doing the job admirably.
And can we just have a straw poll? How many clematis have you seen growing up a eucalypt?
Well, there must be some around in Australia, but certainly probably not so much overseas.
Now, is that the type that needs to be pruned or not?
No, montana can be allowed to have its head. I mean, it can be pruned if it got bigger than you wanted. I can't see how it could ever get bigger than I wanted because it can grow right to the top of that eucalypt as far as I'm concerned. So I'll never need to prune it, which is probably a good thing because it's going to get far too big to get at.
Stunning. Now, the other white flower is right behind us here. Again, I don't think I've ever seen that. What's that one?
Well, it used to be called Abutilon vidifolium, but that particular species has been taken out of Abutilon and it's now in a genus called Corinne-abutilon. So Corinne-abutilon vidifolium in its pure white form. It also comes in a lovely soft bluey mauve form as well, which I don't have at the moment. I've lost it, so I must see if I can pin another one down. But the white form is lovely, and somehow or another the same shape of flower and colour of the clematis and the Corinne-abutilon, I don't know, somehow is lovely and, for me, quite tasteful.
It's very lovely. And then your Gunnera is going to putting up its best show.
Yep, and in front of the Corinne-abutilon too is the lovely dark foliage of the Persicaria called Red Dragon, which I think is a fabulous plant and gives me colour almost all year round. So although herbaceous, I cut it down in the autumn and it starts moving again almost immediately. So I have that wonderful sort of beetroot red foliage pretty well all year round.
It's stunning. All right, well, let's finish our circuit around the pond. Well, Stephen, let us carry on our perambule around your pond.
If we can get through.
Hacking through the
little
foliage.
prune, I can tell. I need to get in here again with my secateurs.
Yes, and there is just a bit of that clematis. Just, so stunning and very beautiful.
And have you noticed how I married it on the right-hand side with my Rubus Benenden?
Now, let's just park the camera and have a moment about that.
Now, this must be familiar to you.
It is, because only a few weeks ago at the wonderful Bickley Vale Gardens, we stumbled across this and I thought it was a Philadelphus.
Yes.
But no.
No, it wasn't. It is in fact a Rubus, which means it's in the blackberry raspberry group, Rubus Benenden. And the plant you saw at Bickley Vale was propagated from this one.
Right. Now yours is in more sun, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets a little bit more sun here. And of course it's been in the ground a lot longer, so it's much larger than the one that Kay had. But it is just coming out and it's going to, over the next week or two, be just a mass of white. It and the clematis are going to fight it out for dominance, I can tell.
Okay, so if I just, there is the rubra and then there is the clematis just on the tree there.
Yeah.
It is a very, very satisfying composition, Mr. Ryan. Well done.
Yes, and so tasteful for me.
Yeah. And then if we just move a little bit up here, we're at the end of the boardwalk and there's an iris of yours that I have not seen before. Yes. There we are.
And it's quite common. It's the water flag or Iris pseudochorus, and it's somewhat weedy in lots of areas, but it's in a comparatively restrained spot here. It gets moisture from the pond and it just gives me a splash of yellow in the late spring.
And where's that from?
It's European. So you'll find it in ponds in England, you'll find it in ponds all over sort of Central Europe, and in some areas like here in Australia, it has become somewhat weedy in some areas.
Ooh, okay. Well, Stephen, leaving the pond, I think there's just one more striking thing for us to look at in our mid-spring peramble around your garden.
Yes.
Cutting through the Tetrapanax grove.
Yes, and it's something that when you see it, it is hardly as subtle as some of the things we've just been looking at.
Oh, here they are. Okay, I'm going to spin the camera and let's have a look.
All right.
Yet more South African beauty.
Yes, exactly, with this fabulous clump, or clumps, of Clivia miniata. It's just the wild form, it's not a man-made hybrid or anything, and it's certainly making a fantastic splash of colour in the garden.
It is, and it's kind of as you would see it in the wild, I guess, because it likes shade, doesn't it?
Oh yes, and it's very good in dry shade, so I don't remember ever watering it. So it just does its thing, gets a little bit frosted sometimes in the winter, but every year I get a show of flowers like this, and I'm always happy to see it.
It is amazing. Of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of people grow them in pots, where they do equally as well.
Yes, and they can in fact be grown indoors as long as you've got the right atmosphere in the house for them, and I think they are fabulous plants. And although some of the new hybrids in the different colours and forms and things that are out there are stunningly beautiful, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the wild form, I have to say.
No, it's gorgeous. I mean, I've seen very yellow ones, and I was just mocking the green one, which you then point out you have at vast expense.
Yeah, it's cost me a fortune to buy a green one. And I have to say, in the garden here, I don't think it's getting enough light, and it's really more cream than green, but anyhow, but you know, it's different and it's nice, but yeah, I'm happy with this.
But when compared to this amazing splosh of orange, it's such a great colour, and in quite a sort of a darkish point of the garden, it's just so eye-catching and beautiful.
Yeah, and far from subtle.
well, a lot like you, Stephen, right? And your garden. And so it's been wonderful to wander around this mid-spring. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Well, I've enjoyed showing you the garden, in fact, because we've engaged with quite a number of plants that we haven't had an opportunity to do so.
This is the thing about gardens and about the seasonal change, is that it's not even, you don't have to think about it all at once, do you? I mean, it took you, I imagine, years to add all these layers.
Oh yes, and I'm still doing it.
So you do have these subtle moments, because literally, I mean, I'm boring and repeating myself saying it, but every time I come, there is something that I've not seen before. I've never seen that clematis. I mean, it's stunning.
Yeah, and most of the year you'll have walked past it and not really paid any attention to it at all.
No.
But yes, it's having its moment in the sun.
Well, I'm really glad we've done this walkthrough today. So if you want to know what we're doing next week, you'll have to hit subscribe.
And don't forget, if you've got a burning horticultural question, to put it in the comments below. Tell me where you're from for context, and we will answer it in our shorts.
We will indeed. Now, we referenced a lot of videos in this video, and I will try and list them all below. And if you're interested in joining the Royal Horticultural Society of Victoria, this video has triggered your interest, we'll put the links below. Mr. Ryan is the patron.
Yeah, which is not a big job.
You haven't been cancelled yet.
No, I haven't been cancelled yet, but give them time.
Anyway, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.